Thank you, Cindy. The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Flores.
Present. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good morning to you. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Happy President's Day. We have a relatively short agenda for today. I hope that extra hour was beneficial to all of you. And I apologize on Friday. I think when I concluded the meeting, I just out of habit said 9 a.m., but when possible, I try to start at 10 a.m. on Mondays, especially for those of you on those late flights and or who just have family and other things you have to take care of. We have one item on the agenda today, and we'll take that, and then afterwards we'll do public comment. I want to remind everybody to please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Keep your cameras on at all times, please. For those of you who will be presenting, please state your name for the record after each question. It makes life a lot easier for our staff. And for those of you following virtually, just because we've learned from last week, times we have issues with technology. Assemblyman Ellison, thank you. And sometimes we can't get to you for whatever reason. Know that that's not intentional, and our team tries diligently to work to get those little hiccups taken care of as soon as they are identified. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 2. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chair Flores, and members of the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs. For the record, my name is Vincent Guthrow, and I serve as the Deputy Director of the Nevada Association of Counties, NACO. Thank you for the opportunity to present Assembly Bill 2 on behalf of NACO, whose members are all of Nevada's 17 counties. I wanted to provide a little background on the issue that Assembly Bill 2 is trying to solve and to provide context for the committee. In Nevada, there are hundreds of state-level boards and commissions. These boards perform critical business on a wide range of very important and very specific public policy issues. Currently, there are over 100 vacancies on boards and commissions in Nevada, and we have provided the committee with a list of all the state boards that currently have vacancies. And also from this list, you can get an example of some of the boards that this bill would address. And I did provide that to committee staff, so I believe you should have that. Currently, under Nevada law, a qualified individual cannot serve on more than one of these boards whose members are appointed by the governor. It is NACO's opinion that diverse and broad local stakeholder representation is needed in order to fully represent the diversity and the needs of our state. This is one of the reasons that we are requesting the change in this bill to allow individuals to serve on more than one board, to ensure that each seat on these boards are filled with individuals who can meet all of the qualifications required and also represent their communities. I wanted to provide a couple of examples of state boards that oversee and provide input on critical local services and tax revenues, just to give the committee an idea of why NACO started having discussions about finding a solution to this problem and engaging other stakeholders, some of which you'll hear from today, and also why we are making this request. First, the recently created Board of Indigent Defense Services, which sets standards and provides oversight on public defenders in Nevada, a service that every county in the state provides. Public defenders provide legal representation to those that cannot afford it, which is guaranteed in the 6th Amendment of our Constitution. For the handful of the county appointments to this board, some of the requirements to serve are that they have to be a resident of a county of less than 100,000 in population. One member must have expertise and background in the finances of local government. And every board member has to have the following: significant experience providing legal representation to indigent persons who are charged with public offenses or have representing children who are alleged to be delinquent or in need of supervision. And they must have a demonstrated commitment to providing effective legal representation to indigent persons. So for our appointments to this board, there are actually not that many folks who would meet all of these qualifications. It would usually be a county commissioner or a county manager who had expertise in county finances, as well as indigent legal defense. As the appointee could not also be a public defender or a district attorney. There are probably only a handful of people in this state that meet these qualifications, and most are on other boards that work on county-specific issues. When the Indigent Defense Board was created, we actually had 3 commissioners who had worked on and cared very much about indigent defense reform and who met all of these qualifications. All 3 of these were on other boards, and so they weren't eligible to serve. One had a term that was ending on another board and decided not to serve on that board again and became eligible at that point to serve. And the other had to resign from another board. And the third felt he could not resign from his seat on the Water District Board in his
the
region.
big bridge.
As he had many years of institutional knowledge on complex water issues, and the county needed his representation there. The third commissioner also happened to have extensive knowledge on indigent defense reform, and his institutional knowledge and voice on that issue was lost. Another example is the Board of Trustees for the Fund for Hospital Care to Indigent Persons. Counties are required by Nevada law to fund and provide for the local social safety net. The Board of Trustees oversees dollars for hospital care for indigent persons, as well as county funds that are contributed to the state plan for Medicaid. This board requires 4 county commissioner appointments, and these commissioners end up learning a very important but complex subject matter area having to do with the formula for funding Medicaid and the web of local dollars that support indigent healthcare. One commissioner with years of experience on this board resigned to serve on the Indigent Defense Board, and the loss of her historic knowledge has been keenly felt. A few other examples of the range of expertise subject matter covered by these boards, other boards that have county representation include the Off-Highway Vehicle Commission, which oversees local grant dollars to fund safe OHV infrastructure and recreation, the Governor's Nevada Complete Count Committee, which governs the census effort, and the State Land Use Planning Advisory Council, or SLUPAC. This example actually currently is exempted from the 1 board limit in NRS, an exemption sought by counties and granted by the legislature, but every county is required to have a representative on that board. Following my testimony, you'll hear of other examples of why this change is needed from the ACLU and also the Director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And I'll let them speak to their experience and the issues that they've encountered. Mr. Chair, if I can indulge the committee, I'd just like to briefly walk you through the bill if that works.
Please do.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. When I mentioned earlier in my testimony that no qualified individual can serve on more than one board, there are actually 2 exceptions to this limitation currently in Nevada law. One of them is the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council. Section 1 of Assembly Bill 2 addresses the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council and makes conforming changes that would remove the reference to this current exception in law, which, if this legislation passes, would no longer be needed. If you look at Section 2, subsection 6, this makes the change that we are seeking to delete the prohibition of a qualified individual from serving on more than one board appointed by the governor. All other qualifications, residency requirements, and other criteria under NRS 232A.020 would remain in effect. As previously mentioned, the other exception to this prohibition under current Nevada law is the State Land Use Planning Advisory Council, or SLUPAC, and Section 3 of AB 2 makes a conforming change that would remove the reference to this existing exception, similar to what was done in Section 1 for the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council. This act would become effective upon passage, and that outlines the pretty straightforward change on this bill. And I thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members. And with that, I'm available to take questions, but also, if all right, or if it pleases the committee, we'd like the ACLU, who's partnering with us on this legislation, to briefly share their perspective.
Thank you for your presentation. Let's move over to ACLU, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Guthrow. My name is Holly Wellborn. I am the Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada. And we're here in support of this legislation and to support the efforts of NACO. We have a very unique sort of niched perspective on why it's necessary to permit the governor to appoint an individual to more than one board or commission. I've had the pleasure of serving as the inmate advocate on the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice and on the Nevada Sentencing Commission, both under the former governor, Governor Sandoval, and under our current governor, Governor Sisolak. But given the current restriction, I was only permitted to serve on one commission or the other. Traditionally, we would have either our legal director or our executive director appointed to one commission and I would serve on the other, and that worked out well. But unfortunately, for the past year, we've had some unforeseen transitions within the ACLU that have tied our hands on ensuring that there was inmate advocate representation on the Sentencing Commission. And I was the only person in the organization who could fill that role, but I was unable to do so. Both commissions have a very similar makeup with two positions that are appointed by the governor, and that's the inmate advocate and the victim advocate. The legislative record is clear that the ACLU of Nevada is the designated organization to serve in the role as inmate advocate, given our connections to impacted communities, our access to national experts on best practices, and the critical role we play in the state legislature and in the courts. During the past interim, due to these vacancies, for about 6 months, there was a vacancy and the inmate advocate position wasn't filled due to this restriction. It took quite a long time to put a new executive director in place. We now have Tar Hazabullah. We're incredibly excited to have him and look forward to him serving on one of these commissions. But that doesn't reduce the fact that we're still in this stage of transition. I had to resign my post as the inmate advocate on the ACAJ in order to apply to be inmate advocate on the Sentencing Commission. That commission meets on February 19th, and given the time and delay that it takes to get appointed to commissions, we could be looking at yet again another meeting where there is no one representing the voice of one of the most marginalized communities, if not the most marginalized communities in our state. Right now, we're in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic that is ravaging Nevada prisons, and incarcerated people are dying. There have been a total of 4,672 cases in Nevada prisons. 52 people have died, and there is no voting member on those commissions, which is something that could have been avoided had I had the opportunity to apply to serve on both commissions just until we filled the vacancies within our organization. These commissions weigh heavily on the side of law enforcement, district attorneys, judges, and the Department of Corrections, whose interests often diverge from incarcerated persons or those who are accused in making their way through the criminal justice system. I want to make it very clear that this bill is not intended to appoint the same person to every commission. When there's opportunity to appoint two different people, the governor absolutely should, and he should continuously strive for diversity and increasing voices on different commissions and boards throughout the state. But in situations like the one that I just described, we have to give the governor some deference to be able to make some decisions on a temporary basis to fill those vacancies so voices of incredibly marginalized communities are not stifled and have a seat at the table. So thank you. Those are my comments, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. This is
Yes.
Vincent Guthrow again with NACO. We also have Mr. Brad Kroll on, who's from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and I think he wanted to make some remarks on this proposal as well.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay on your end? Great, thank you. Again, my name is Brad Kroll. I'm the director of the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and I just wanted to thank the chair for indulging me and the committee for indulging me to make two very brief comments for the purposes of considering this bill today. First and foremost, let me just also give my appreciation to NACO for bringing this bill forward. The first point I want to make is that given that AB2, the underlying statute that it amends is within the jurisdiction of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, I wanted to make sure the committee knew that we are okay with this from that perspective. We're not concerned about the changes being made from a jurisdictional standpoint or the ability for us to implement our mission at the department. Secondly, on the merits of the bill, we do feel that I can't say I support the bill specifically. I can say that I support the merits of the bill. The department itself, speaking just in that regard, is one of the larger departments. We have 8 divisions and 4 programs, yet we have 13 or more boards and commissions associated with our department. It's hard to get those boards and commissions filled with the quality and talent and diversity of candidates we would like. And given that we are at least we're continuing to add statewide to the amount of boards and commissions we have without necessarily removing any. It gets more and more difficult all the time to find qualified candidates to serve Nevada and sit on these boards. So with the objective of finding the best qualified candidates and the widest applicant pool to sit on these boards, certainly from within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, we would appreciate it. And I think from a statewide perspective, it does make sense. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to make a few comments.
And thank you. I know we have several folk on the committee wishing to ask a few questions, and I'll try to take them in the order that I saw them. We'll start off first with Assemblyman Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. NACO, the first question is NACO is, well, actually, you could probably answer most of these. You said the population under 100,000, but you didn't mean that's in the bill. You just meant that as a statement. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Assemblyman Ellison, this is Vincent Guthrow, Deputy Director at NACO, for the record. So the reference that I made to the 100,000, I assume you're talking about my testimony where I present.
Correct.
That is for a bill. That is for a board of indigent defense services. I was giving the committee a little bit of background there on the sort of depth and focus of those boards. And on the Board of Indigent Defense Services, which oversees public defense in Nevada, there is a requirement that 4 of the appointees that NACO makes come from counties of 100,000 or less. Hope that clarifies.
It does. And, I'd like to see it at 100,000 or less, amended to that. But the other thing I've got is, based on some of the statements from the ACLU, is it not true that a lot of these boards appointments are being tied up because they're not being appointed from up above? Is that correct or not? And there's people applying for a lot of these boards, but not the doubles, but a lot of the different boards that are not being appointed. Are they not being filled through administration?
For the record, Mr. Chair, I believe that question is for me. I can do my best to answer it. Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada, for the record. Thank you for that question, Assemblyman Ellison. I can't speak for the governor's office, but I think that there are several obstacles. There's a lot of time and vetting that has to go into a commission appointment. When you apply for a board or commission, you go through an application process. You have to get a waiver that's then notarized. You have to give both of those documents to the governor's office. So there are systems that are in place that just sort of delay those appointments. There are other appointments that there are interview processes for. So I think there's any number of reasons that can delay the appointment of someone to a particular commission. And I think from our perspective, why this would be helpful is, due to those delays, if we could, handle this and get those appointments taken care of during the interim, then we won't have unnecessary vacancies from that perspective.
Okay. Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Please follow up, Assemblyman.
Could you explain, would 100,000 population serve your organization? Would you have to have that above that?
For the record, Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada. Mr. Chair, I think, again, that question was for me. I think there's a little, again, a need for some clarification on the Indigent Defense Board. Mr. Guthrow, he was, describing some of the limitations on those appointments. And I know quite a bit about the Indigent Defense Board because it arose out of some litigation that we had filed against the state. And I think when we're talking about limitations on population, it's incredibly important on that particular board because we're talking about rural indigent defense services. So, and people from a community that's quite small where indigent defense services are significantly lacking, that the pool of people through which, NACO has to suggest for the governor to appoint, that this bill would also, right now the governor's hands are tied in appointing people across different commissions. So we want to maintain that appointment for it from a small community on the Indigent Defense Board, but there could be experts who are appointed to that board that would also serve well on another board or commission. It might be the only person in that community who has those skills or expertise. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Next, we have Assemblywoman Black, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you guys for the presentation. I'm curious, it says there's 295 vacancies on boards and commissions. Can you tell me if this were to pass, how many of those 295 vacancies would be filled or could be filled?
Mr. Chair, for the record, this is Vincent Guthrow with the Nevada Association of Counties. I'll take a stab at that because we don't ultimately, I do know that this would make it a lot easier for us to bring that expertise and diverse representation onto boards. But it's hard for me to predict the future about those positions getting filled. Like I said, I just think this is another tool. It's sort of in the toolbox for us to try and get that community input into those boards. I'm sorry, I don't have a concrete number for you, but I appreciate the question.
Sure. May I have a follow-up, please?
Follow-up.
Thank you. So I spoke to Mr. Guthrow previously about this bill and expressed my concerns with it, so I don't think this is going to come as any surprise. But a couple of observations. I keep hearing diversity, but if we have a lot of the same people on different boards, I'm confused how that equates to diversity. I also expressed to Mr. Guthrow that I understand this situation because I served on the city council in Mesquite, a population in a town of 25,000, not including children and seasonal residents. It was my job to appoint people to various different boards and committees within the city. And a lot of times it did take a lot of work and it wasn't necessarily easy to find people, but it was always important to me that I made sure that I found people from different diverse backgrounds and experiences so that we would have different experiences, people with different connections on there that could bring different things to the board. So I think it's important that if you're going to have a board, you try to be, like you said, as diversified as possible. And I really think that this ties your hands when you're trying to do that. I guess my final comment would be, if you are dealing with a lot of people that you're looking for similar skills and expertise that transfer to different boards and committees, perhaps the better option here is to combine some of those committees and some of those commissions so that you don't have to have one person with the same set of skills serving in the same kind of vein on multiple committees and commissions. It seems like you should just be able to combine some things and have one person serving on one kind of greater committee if it's that specific to that cause. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make one comment through you to Assemblywoman Black. I really appreciate the question. I know we had a dialogue about it.
I'm sorry, if I could have you state your name for the record again.
Oh, sorry, Vincent Guthrow with the Nevada Association of Counties. Thank you. So as far as combining boards, that's not a policy question that I can answer or that I can solve. It's we fill the boards that are created either through legislation or other means, and at the pleasure of this body. And we do believe that local input is critical, and you can see that in a lot of the board requirements that are outlined. And we are attempting to fill those seats with as much diversity as possible. That the NACO board is committed to that sort of broad stakeholder engagement. And again, we're filling boards that are created by the legislature or through other means. We may have input or support these boards. I'm not trying to suggest that, but we're filling boards that are created outside of our purview, I guess is my point. And I appreciate that sort of efficiency piece, but I did want to sort of clarify what we're doing on our end. So thank you.
Next, we have Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice seeing both of you, Mr. Guthrie and Ms. Wellborn. I have a question that's a little bit of a crystal ball question, because I'm looking over this list, which, by the way, is very helpful for us to see just how many commissions and or boards do not have enough people as of January 14th. There's a few that have me very concerned, like the State Emergency Response Commission. It doesn't seem like there's anybody on that at this time, and some of the others. So in a way, it's not related to the language that's being presented. It's more about the process. So if the chair would like me to ask this offline, I'm more than happy to, but I'll bring it up right now, and then the chair can decide whether or not it's appropriate to discuss this. Do you believe that there are so many openings on so many of these commissions and boards? Is it due to the expertise of the applicants, or is it due to kind of what Assemblymember Ellison was bringing up, the just the advertising of how we get it through? Or what is it, only just because we just don't have enough expertise as to what is causing the problem with so many openings at this time? And I realize this is an opinion-based question, but just wanted to get your expertise on it.
Vincent Guthrow, for the record, with the Nevada Association of Counties. That is a great question. I don't know that I have an immediate answer for you. I would personally like, I'm not the chair, but I would love to take this question offline with you. I don't have the answer right now in today's hearing, but I think it's a valuable question. Thank you for it.
And I totally understand that. So I'm more than happy to have the discussion and then share it with the rest of the committee, if that would work out for the chair.
Perfect. And if we could have just whatever information be shared to the committee manager, and then she can make sure that that information gets to every member. Next, we have Assemblywoman Considine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Echoing a bit what has been said, it's very clear that there are boards and commissions that are really in need of people. But what struck me about this bill, and my question is, we seem to go from one extreme to another, where before it was one person, one board, and then if we move that prohibition completely, then it might open situations where you have one person that has a lot of expertise and you can check a lot of boxes by possibly putting that one person in multiple. So I'm wondering why maybe, was there a discussion or any ideas about like a middle ground? Sort of in the event when there is no one qualified and willing to serve in the board, then someone already on a board can be appointed, something along those lines. So I guess my question is, was there some sort of middle ground discussed? And if so, why was that not listed?
For the record, this is Vincent Guthrow, Deputy Director at the Nevada Association of Counties. The reason why, I guess from our perspective, that it wasn't, I don't know if it's a middle ground, but if there wasn't some sort of difference taken, it was because we just felt like this was a limitation that was being put on appointments. And we'd had all these examples come up, recently in the long term. And we just felt like, as I stated, that this would be another tool for us to try and get boards filled. And get positions filled and get those voices and stakeholders put on that, put on those critical statewide boards.
Thank you.
Next, I have Assemblywoman Brown May, please.
Thank you, Chair Flores. Thank you. Thanks very much for that great presentation. I guess I want to start by saying, in my professional life, I've often been the person that has shared the availability of this information and open seats with many people in my sphere as a way to try to fill those vacant seats and bring diversity about to many of our boards and commissions. So I think my question is really relative to how do we ensure that that diversity and membership continues despite narrowing this. So many members of the administration, in my experience, serve on multiple boards and commissions. And as an at-large appointee, and I have served on a couple of boards and commissions across our state, most recently with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the at-large member is often at a disadvantage because we have such long-term administration or professional support in those committees. With scheduling or other difficulties, right? So if you're trying to bring diversity in, how do we make sure that that membership continues and we don't further narrow participation in this way? And here, I'm going to give you one example, and I don't know that you can answer this or not, but just as an example. The Governor's Workforce Development Board has a current vacancy based on your handout that you sent to us, that one chief elected official shall collectively represent cities and counties, right? One chief elected official. And then the State Rehabilitation Council, a few pages back, says one representative of the State Workforce Investment Board. So it shows that we have some crossover already in many of our boards and commissions. And so my real question is really, how are we maintaining diversity and participation from a wide array of people?
Mr. Chair, for the record, this is Vincent Guthrow, Nevada Association of Counties, through you to the Assemblywoman. Thank you for that question. So I think right there, I understand that on the face of it, it might seem that we're limiting diversity by opening this up, but as you can see, there's no representation now, right? On those two boards. I'm just taking your example. And I think that that's sort of the objective here, is that it's not an issue of stacking boards. It's not an issue. It's an issue that right there, you have two boards with no representation on them from local input. I guess I would use your example to point out that we don't have that diversity right now. So that's how I view it anyways. So appreciate it. And
okay.
Assemblywoman, I'm sorry, we haven't had a chance to meet with you on this bill. You know, you're fresh to the legislature, and congratulations on your appointment. And we look forward to meeting in the future. So appreciate that.
Follow up, Chair.
Follow up.
Mr. Guthrow, thank you kindly. I do appreciate that, and I understand I'm late to the assembly, and for, absolutely have no harm, no foul with regard to not meeting on this bill. It is a bill that I have worked very closely on, and this is an issue that I have worked on for a number of years. So I understand the background behind it and the need to fill our boards and commissions, and respect that we're moving in that direction. I also know that a lot of times there is an administrative holdup in the governor's office with the vetting process that was noted earlier today. And so while we might have a vacancy noted on this piece of paper, it may actually be in the process of being filled. And with those two boards in particular, I'd like to note that there's only one vacancy on both of them. So I think they do have good representation. Thanks very much.
Chairman Flores, may I add to that?
Please.
Thank you. Holly Wellborn, Policy Director, ACLU of Nevada, for the record. I wanted to also point out that this bill specifically, it's looking at gubernatorial appointments, but there are a variety of different appointing authorities in a lot of these statutes that create different boards and commissions. So it's not only fully the governor's office who's making appointment decisions. We've got appointments that designate, for example, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department that says, this board must include a member of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and that individual ends up usually being Mr. Calloway, who sits on both the ACAJ and the Nevada Sentencing Commission. He has a strong voice. He's a critical voice on those boards and commissions, but he's just an example of one person who does have overlap on those two commissions because of the nature of his involvement with the legislature, his relationships with folks. But perhaps it would be on the appointing authority to put someone in with perhaps a different type of background, other than Mr. Calloway, who does a lot of the government affairs work. Perhaps, they could mix it up and appoint someone else the same way that we would when we're fully staffed and we don't have the obstacles that I described earlier. So I think a lot of those questions on diversity and what are those solutions moving forward, it's a lot broader question than kind of opening up a little bit of an opportunity for the governor to appoint one person to multiple commissions when necessary, when it's absolutely critical to do so. But we have to look at how are all of these other appointing authorities proceeding and how they select who they're putting on a board or commission that isn't one that's selected by the governor.
Next, we have Madam Vice Chair Torres, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Guthrow and Ms. Wellborn, for your presentation. I do appreciate it. And I guess I just wanted to know, I'm looking at the exhibit that was added to today's meeting, and I'm looking at the vacancies, and what I'm noticing from just like a Control F search, and I haven't had time to count, do we know about how many seats could be filled by the governor now? Because I know that this is several pages long, and I think a colleague had noted that there were perhaps over 300 vacancies available right now. But it appears to me that there's less than 50 that would be appointed by the governor through this legislation, correct?
Mr. Chair, for the record, Vincent Guthrow, Deputy Director at the Nevada Association of Counties. So I'm sorry, I feel like there's two questions in there. Are you asking how many can be appointed by the governor or how many are pending appointment?
Yeah, I'm just the document, the vacancy list that was sent over, and I think that there's maybe some misunderstanding about whether or not these could all be appointed by the governor, or if we have an idea about how many of these would be appointed by the governor, because my understanding is that very few of these would be gubernatorial appointments, correct?
Mr. Chair, Vincent Guthrow, for the record, Nevada Association of Counties. Based on what I pulled from the, right, so there is some diversity here, but when I pulled this from to provide this resource to the committee, these are gubernatorial vacancies, but there may be some items here where they could be sort of appointed directly. I can't answer for how many are pending with the governor's office, but based on this list, it said board and commission vacancies from the governor's office. So I'm not sure. It sounds to me like, I mean, some of these are sort of out of our purview as well. And I can't answer for what their process is at the governor's office and how many might be in the queue, I guess.
Next, we have Assemblyman Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just say that I really appreciated the question from Assemblywoman Considine. It really gets at what my chief concern is with this. To me, looking at current law, there's no doubt that one of the motivations for this was not just obviously having a diversity of viewpoints, which is of course important, but we're really making sure that we avoid a situation where too much power was in the hands of too few individuals, which is one of the most essential, if not the most essential, principles inherent to our system of government. There was a comment made earlier by Ms. Wellborn. I think she said that, I'm paraphrasing here, but that this bill is not meant to allow people to serve on a limitless number of boards. I certainly understand the challenges this is aimed to address. And I think she also made the comment that where possible, the governor should appoint different members. My concern is that when looking at the bill, there's really nothing that would ensure that, nothing really unless I'm missing something, nothing that would actually uphold that intention, either in this bill or elsewhere. So I guess what I'm wondering is, other than just sort of hoping and relying on the governor and others to abide by that, the desire not to have people just on a limitless number of boards, is there anything you can point to that actually would prevent such a situation if this bill were to pass? Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
that question I know could be for anyone who wants to address it.
Sure. Mr. Chair, this is Vincent Guthrow with the Nevada Association of Counties again, and I'll let Holly chime in too, since it was sort of directed at, I'll let Ms. Wellborn chime in too, since this was directed at her. I think the issue about this is getting a little bit muddled in the sense that I think there just needs, I want to convey an understanding to the committee that some of the requirements for these boards and the person that would meet them, you know, there may only be one person available to do that. So it's not in the sense that we're limiting and that we're trying to stack boards. It's that the ability to find the person that would meet all of these qualifications. And I guess the inverse of that is that, you know, that person or that individual might need to represent sort of an underserved constituency, and it would be difficult to find them only one person, you know, it would be difficult to find multiple people to do that, I guess would be my point. But I'll let Ms. Wellborn chime in on it since the question was of her, but I just wanted to get that out, hopefully craft that understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Guthrow. Chair Flores, Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada. I appreciate that question, Assemblyman Matthews, and we're certainly concerned that traditionally people have been overlooked to serve on critical commissions and have critical voices across the spectrum of board appointments. And I think, again, that we have to take a look at the appointing authorities generally. That it does seem to be, you know, this sort of lack of diversity and lack of representation in those appointments that aren't gubernatorial appointments. I do know that there is a concerted effort, and perhaps some of the backlog is making a concerted effort to try to diversify, culturally diversify. I mean, I think a lot of these questions really should be asked of the governor's office and whomever directs boards and commissions on what steps they're taking in order to appoint diverse individuals, diversity of background, diversity of education, different people to serve on commissions. But to Mr. Guthrow's point, a lot of these appointments, they're very narrow and specific. Like it has to be an individual with a certain, you know, set of skills or expertise, or in a community with a certain population that has certain degree levels, and there might literally be only one person, and that individual is needed on multiple commissions, and they're unable to. And in the same situation that we're in as the ACLU and the inmate advocate, and us being the designated inmate advocate for those commissions, we get to a point where our hands are really tied in having those marginalized voices heard. And I think that the key component is the people who are appointed to these commissions. We're serving the public, we're serving voices that often aren't heard, and that increases the voices of different communities who are often overlooked on these boards.
Thanks to you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, if we could have Assemblywoman Dickman, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I was really pleased to hear Assemblywoman Considine's question as well, because I agree, it seems like we're going from one extreme to the other. And I don't think there's anyone on this committee who would deny the need to have these positions on the boards filled, but we're also a little concerned with the consequences of opening the door this wide. And so I was wondering if you'd be open to limiting it to perhaps 2 or 3 boards that a person could be on.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Vincent Guthrow at the Nevada Association of Counties. I presented the bill as is. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to take these conversations before a work session and figure that out. I can't, I'd have to go back to my members and think and ask them about that, but that's sort of, I'm presenting the bill as is. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
All right, well, I hope you would look into it and possibly consider it, because I think a lot of us would be more comfortable with it. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to follow up. That's sort of what I was implying, is that we'd have to go back before a work session. I can't answer that question right now for my members. So definitely we can work on that. So I appreciate the proposal. Thanks.
Next, if we could have Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this time. I appreciate the presentation. And I, with all the questions that are being asked right now, I am really confused. You know, when I read this, and I'm rereading it, and I'm again perplexed with all the other questions, it seems to me that it's kind of simple here, that because we have, you know, if we had 500 committees, you know, and we had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 experts in certain areas, that the governor is asking, or this committee is asking, that those experts be assigned to the committees that would benefit their expertise. I don't see the confusion of having one person that's an expert. You know, if we had a surgeon that's an expert in heart surgery, why wouldn't we want him on every single committee? What is the difference? I can't understand. It's almost like it's a conspiracy right now to have an expert on several different committees. So please explain to me, you know, because it seems like it's a real simple ask, that because we're limited in experts in this state, that these people be assigned to multiple committees. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Vincent Guthrie with the Nevada Association of Counties. Thank you for the comments, Assemblywoman. I think that's sort of what I was getting at about the specific background that's needed and the experts that would be available in those communities to represent. So appreciate those comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I do see on the chat, Bradley requesting to make a comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the information of the committee as they consider this, not all boards and commissions come in the same color or flavor or stripes, so to speak. There's advisory boards, which are purely advisory in nature. There's boards that have a regulatory function. There's boards that have oversee the administration of professional licenses. And the impact of having those boards not filled is different depending on what kind of duties those boards have. So for instance, a regulatory board, if it's not filled, it can't necessarily perform its regulatory function. And so something to consider here is what the board is designed to do, whether it's able to conduct its mission without the full complement of members. And then obviously there's how challenging is it to get these boards and commissions filled with the right person in a timely way. So just want to make that distinction that there's a difference here between various boards and the implications of not having them filled.
Perfect. Members, did we have any additional comments before we move into support, opposition, and those wishing to speak in the neutral position? If I accidentally skipped you, please feel free to unmute yourself and announce your name. And again, we'll have an opportunity to ask more questions at the conclusion of the presentation, along with the ongoing conversation that will inevitably happen for the next several weeks. So at this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 2 to please testify. I want to remind you to please unmute yourself, limit your remarks to 2 minutes, and that you remain respectful.
To testify in support of Bill number AB2, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. caller with the last three digits of 732, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 732, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Kyle Davis. It's Kyledavis. Happy to be here appearing in front of the committee this morning. I am here in support of AB2. Appreciate NACO bringing the bill forward. Having been a part of the state's boards and commissions process, both as a member and also working with and participating with many of these boards and commissions, I realize how difficult it is sometimes to find the appropriate people to serve on these boards, which do serve an important part of our state government. So I would encourage the committee's support of this legislation. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. If we could go to the next individual wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 2.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Sounds good. Please let the record reflect that we did receive a document indicating that there are 7 individuals in support. And I know some of them were listed as wishing to speak, but I know we've had issues in the past with folk logging in. At this point, I'd like to go to those wishing to speak in opposition to Assembly Bill 2.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers at this time.
And if we could go to those wishing to speak in the neutral position of Assembly Bill 2.
Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
And again, I'll clarify for the record that we did have 3 individuals indicate that they were in the neutral position and had indicated that they wished to speak, but again, unclear if they were unable to log in. If we could have either one of you, 2 of you, all 3 of you come back and any closing remarks you may have.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I think I really appreciate the questions. They're pretty exhaustive, so I don't have any further remarks other than to thank the committee for their time, and I really appreciate the dialogue this morning. Thank you again for the opportunity.
And thank you. Members, I appreciate the questions, and I think everyone comes from the same lens that we want to ensure that we don't have the same individuals making up all the boards, and I think it's been clarified in the record that that is not the intent. And I think at the same time, you're all willing to work with our sponsors and understanding that we have vacancies because there are individuals who could fill them. However, because of our current rules, they are not allowed to sit on multiple boards, and we're trying to take away those restrictions, especially with those highly demanding seats where it's a very specific resume that's necessary, and we don't have that many folk who can achieve or fulfill those requirements. I'm confident that we'll get to a middle ground here where we can meet the concerns of those of the presenters brought up, and at the same time, alleviate your concerns and make sure that we're continuing to request that we have boards that look like Nevada, both ideologically and in terms of different walks of life that we come from. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 2. I urge the presenters to continue to work with our members, and I'm confident we'll get to a good place. At this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Anybody wishing to speak for public comment, this is your time.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Perfect. Members, as you know, for tomorrow, Tuesday, February 16th, we have 3 hearings on Assembly Bill 22, Assembly Bill 76, and Assembly Bill 77. I urge you to please give yourself an opportunity to review those ahead of time, reach out to the sponsors. Should you have any questions that you would like to get addressed ahead of time. And I look forward to our hearing tomorrow. We'll be starting at 9 a.m. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.